The sound of polished leather shoes clicking against the marble floors echoed through the hallway as Michael Thompson strode purposefully towards the conference room. Heads turned as he passed by, his crisp suit and perfectly knotted tie exuding authority. Michael lived for these moments, the subtle nods of acknowledgement, the way people seemed to step aside to let him pass. Power wasn't just his job, it was his identity. Inside the room, the atmosphere was tense. A presentation had gone disastrously wrong, and Michael was on the warpath. "James Carter," Michael called out sharply, his voice cutting through the murmurs. James, seated at the far end of the table, looked up from his laptop. His unassuming figure, clad in a simple button-down shirt and slightly scuffed shoes, seemed out of place among the sleek, designer outfits surrounding him. "Yes, sir," James responded, his tone calm but uncertain. Michael's eyes narrowed as he pointed at the screen showing a slide riddled with errors. "This is unacceptable." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Who approved this disaster?" James hesitated before replying. "I take full responsibility. It was my oversight." Michael let out a derisive laugh. "Oversight? This isn't an oversight, Carter. It's incompetence. Do you even understand the standards we operate at here?" James opened his mouth to reply, but Michael cut him off, pacing the room as he continued his tirade. "This company doesn't have room for mediocrity," Michael said, his voice rising. "Look around you, Carter. Do you see how your so-called oversight reflects on us as a team? On me?" James's face flushed, but he maintained his composure. "I understand the mistake, and I'm willing to fix it immediately." Michael slammed a hand on the table, startling everyone. "Fix it? Oh no, Carter. You've already embarrassed this team enough. You've embarrassed me. Fixing it won't erase the damage you've done." The other employees exchanged uneasy glances, but no one dared to intervene. "Let me ask you something, Carter," Michael continued, his tone dripping with disdain. "Did it ever occur to you that the way you present yourself might be part of the problem? Look at you. You're a reflection of this company. How do you expect anyone to take you seriously when you can't even take yourself seriously?" James shifted in his seat, visibly uncomfortable. No," Michael interrupted, raising a hand. "No excuses. This is about more than just your work. It's about your image, your professionalism. Frankly, Carter, you're a liability." The room was silent, the tension palpable. James took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "With respect, Mr. Thompson, I believe my contributions to the team should speak for themselves." Michael smirked, leaning against the table. "Contributions? You mean this train wreck of a presentation? Let me be clear, Carter. This isn't a charity. We don't hand out participation trophies for mediocrity." James's hands clenched into fists under the table, but his voice remained steady. "I understand your concerns, and I'll take steps to ensure this doesn't happen again." Michael straightened up, crossing his arms. "You're right about one thing, it won't happen again. Because you're done here." James blinked, stunned. "Excuse me? You heard me. You're fired." Michael's tone was cold, final. Gasps rippled through the room. A junior employee at the corner of the table muttered, "That's harsh," but quickly fell silent under Michael's glare. James rose from his seat slowly, his face a mixture of shock and quiet determination. "I see. If that's your decision, Mr. Thompson, I'll respect it. But I hope you'll reconsider the way you handle situations like this in the future. Leadership isn't just about authority. It's about understanding the people you lead." Michael scoffed. "Spare me the lecture, Carter. Maybe you'll have better luck finding a job where mediocrity is acceptable." James gathered his belongings, his movements deliberate and calm despite the humiliation. As he exited the room, his eyes briefly met Michael's, and for a fleeting moment, there was something in his gaze that Michael couldn't quite place. For the rest of the day, the atmosphere in the office was heavy. Whispers circulated about the incident, but no one dared to confront Michael. Later that evening, sitting in his spacious office, Michael stared at the city skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The triumph he usually felt after asserting his authority was absent. Instead, there was an odd sense of unease gnawing at him. He replayed the events of the day in his mind, James's calm demeanor in the face of humiliation standing out. There had been no anger, no pleading, just quiet dignity. Shaking his head, Michael dismissed the thought. James Carter was an employee who didn't fit the company's image, nothing more. Still, as he left the office and stepped into his waiting car, a nagging voice at the back of his mind whispered, "Did I make a mistake?" The conference room buzzed with anticipation the following morning. Employees filed in, some clutching coffee cups, others balancing laptops, but all wearing expressions of curiosity and unease. Rumors had been swirling since the abrupt firing of James Carter. Now, an unexpected company-wide meeting called by the executive board only added fuel to the fire. Michael Thompson stood near the front, arms crossed, exuding his usual confidence. He had convinced himself that yesterday's decision was the right one. James had been a liability, an embarrassment. But the gnawing unease from the night before hadn't entirely subsided. "Big announcement today," whispered Sarah, one of the marketing leads, to a colleague as they took their seats. "Probably a new client or some restructuring," the colleague replied, glancing towards Michael. The door opened, and the room fell silent as the board members entered, followed by a man dressed in a sharply tailored suit. His calm, commanding presence drew immediate attention. Michael squinted, his confidence faltering. It was James Carter. The murmurs began almost instantly. "Wait, isn't that? Wasn't he fired yesterday? What is going on?" James strode to the center of the room, his demeanor entirely transformed from the humble figure of the day before. The scuffed shoes were gone, replaced by polished leather. His simple shirt was now an immaculate designer ensemble. Michael's heart pounded as the chairman of the board, Mr. Hensley, stepped forward. "Good morning, everyone," Mr. Hensley began, his voice calm but authoritative. "We've called this meeting to introduce someone who will play a pivotal role in the future of our company." Michael frowned, trying to piece together the situation. Mr. Hensley gestured towards James. "Please welcome James Carter, the new owner of the company." The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Gasps and murmurs spread through the crowd, but none were more stunned than Michael. His jaw tightened, his face flushing red. "Thank you, Mr. Hensley," James said smoothly, stepping forward. His voice was steady, carrying an air of authority that no one had detected before. "It's a pleasure to formally introduce myself to all of you. Over the past few months, I've had the privilege of working among you, observing the culture, the challenges, and the strengths of this company. What I've seen has been enlightening." Michael's mind raced, struggling to process what he was hearing. This couldn't be happening. James Carter, the man he had humiliated and fired, was his new boss? James continued, his gaze sweeping the room. "For those of you who don't know, I recently acquired this company as part of a larger initiative to invest in organizations with potential for growth and innovation. However, my investment isn't just financial, it's personal. I wanted to understand the people and the environment before making any decisions about the future." His eyes landed on Michael, and for a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. "That's why I chose to work here incognito," James added, his tone calm but pointed. "To experience firsthand what it means to be part of this team." Michael's stomach churned as he felt the weight of James's gaze. James turned his attention back to the group. "I've seen a lot of talent and dedication here, but I've also seen areas where improvement is desperately needed, starting with how we treat one another." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Michael clenched his fists, his mind replaying yesterday's events in vivid detail. "Mr. Carter," Michael began, his voice tight, but James cut him off with a raised hand. "Please let me finish," James said firmly, though without hostility. Michael's face burned with embarrassment as the room turned its attention back to James. "The culture of a company is defined not just by its policies, but by the actions of its leaders," James continued. "Respect, collaboration, and inclusion aren't optional. They're essential." Several employees nodded in agreement, their expressions a mix of admiration and relief. James's voice softened, but his words carried undeniable weight. "Yesterday, I had an experience that highlighted just how far we still have to go." Michael froze. He knew what was coming, but there was no way to stop it. James paused, looking directly at him. "I won't name names, but I was publicly humiliated and dismissed without so much as a conversation. Not because of my work, but because of assumptions made about my appearance and demeanor. The room was deathly silent. All eyes darted between James and Michael, the tension almost unbearable. James smiled faintly, breaking the heavy silence. Thankfully, I'm not here to dwell on the past. I'm here to build a future where such incidents don't happen again. And that starts with accountability and growth. Michael felt a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. His polished confidence was unraveling, and for the first time, he found himself speechless. James stepped closer to the table, his tone shifting to one of resolve. I believe in second chances. I believe people can change, but only if they're willing to acknowledge their mistakes and commit to doing better. That's why I've decided to give certain individuals an opportunity to prove they're capable of the leadership we need. Michael's throat tightened. He knew the words were meant for him. As the meeting concluded, employees swarmed James with questions and congratulations, their excitement palpable. Michael remained rooted to the spot, his mind spinning. Later, as the room emptied, James approached him. "Mr. Thompson," James said evenly. Michael stood, his usual bravado gone. "Mr. Carter, James, I want to apologize for..." James held up a hand, silencing him. "There's no need for explanations. What matters now is how you choose to move forward. Actions speak louder than words." Michael nodded, his face pale. "Understood." James studied him for a moment, his expression unreadable. "We'll see." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Michael to grapple with the weight of his humiliation and the daunting prospect of redemption. Michael Thompson sat in his office, staring at his blank computer screen. His thoughts were a jumbled mess of frustration, shame, and panic. The humiliation he had experienced during the meeting was unlike anything he'd ever faced before. How could someone he had dismissed so easily, so thoughtlessly, turn out to be the new owner of the company? He tapped his pen against the desk, his usual confidence replaced by a gnawing anxiety. James Carter's words from the meeting echoed in his mind. Actions speak louder than words. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," Michael said, his voice lacking its usual edge. It was Sarah from marketing, holding a folder. She hesitated before stepping inside. "I've got the client report you requested," she said, placing it on his desk. Michael nodded absently. "Thanks, Sarah." She lingered for a moment, clearly wanting to say something. "Are you okay, Michael?" After everything in the meeting, his jaw tightened. "I'm fine. Just focused on moving forward." Sarah gave him a tentative nod. "Well, if you need anything, let me know." And she hesitated. "I think it's good that Mr. Carter is giving us all a chance to improve." Michael managed a thin smile as she left, but her words stung. A chance to improve. The phrase felt like a polite way of saying he'd been put on notice. Later that afternoon, Michael found himself sitting in a small, informal meeting James had called with the leadership team. Unlike the high-stakes, polished boardroom meetings Michael was used to, this one was held in a casual lounge area with no hierarchy implied. James stood at the front, his demeanor approachable yet commanding. "Thanks for joining me today. I want to have an open discussion about our goals moving forward. This isn't about assigning blame. It's about identifying opportunities for growth." Michael sat stiffly, keenly aware of the eyes on him. James continued, his tone warm but firm. "Let's start by talking about leadership. What do you think makes a leader effective?" The room was silent for a moment before Sarah spoke up. "I think a good leader listens to their team and builds trust." "Absolutely," James said with a nod. "Trust is foundational. Without it, teams can't thrive." Another manager added, "I think empathy is important. Understanding what your team members are going through makes a big difference." Michael shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his usual instinct to dominate the conversation quelled by the knowledge that anything he said would be scrutinized. James turned his attention to Michael. "What about you, Michael? What do you think makes a great leader?" Michael cleared his throat, feeling the weight of the question. "I think a leader needs to set high standards and hold the team accountable." James tilted his head slightly, considering his words. Standards and accountability are important, no doubt. But how do you balance that with trust and empathy? The question hung in the air, and Michael felt trapped. He couldn't admit he'd never considered that balance before. Not after yesterday's debacle. I suppose it's about understanding when to push and when to support, he said finally, the answer feeling hollow even as he said it. James didn't press further, but his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. As the weeks passed, Michael found himself under an unfamiliar level of scrutiny. Employees who once feared him now seemed emboldened, openly questioning his decisions in ways they never had before. During one particularly tense meeting, Michael presented a new marketing strategy, only to be met with skepticism from the team. "Michael, don't you think this approach might come across as a bit tone-deaf to our audience?" Sarah asked. Michael bristled, but forced himself to stay composed. "I believe the data supports this direction." James, who had been sitting quietly at the back, chose this moment to intervene. "Data is valuable, but so is perspective," he said. "Michael, why don't you and Sarah collaborate to refine this strategy? Two heads are often better than one." Michael nodded stiffly, swallowing his pride. Of course. The meeting ended, and as the team filed out, James approached Michael. "You handled that well," James said. Michael raised an eyebrow. "Did I?" James smiled faintly. "You didn't shut her down. That's progress." Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. "This isn't easy for me." "Change rarely is," James replied. "But you're capable of it. The question is whether you're willing." The turning point came during a high-profile project involving a major client. The stakes were enormous, and the team needed to be at their best. Michael was tasked with leading the initiative, but instead of taking his usual authoritarian approach, he decided to try something different. During the first planning session, he opened the floor to ideas. "I want to hear everyone's thoughts before we move forward," he said, surprising the team. The discussion was lively, and while Michael found it difficult to relinquish control, he noticed something he hadn't before. When people felt heard, their contributions were more thoughtful and creative. By the time the project was completed, the results exceeded expectations. The client was thrilled, and the team's morale was at an all-time high. After the final presentation, James pulled Michael aside. "That was impressive," James said. "You let the team lead, and it paid off." Michael nodded, a hint of pride in his expression. "I'm learning." James smiled. "Good. Leadership isn't about being perfect, it's about growing." For the first time in weeks, Michael felt a genuine sense of accomplishment. The humiliation of that initial meeting still lingered, but now it served as a reminder of how far he had come, and how far he still had to go. The office buzzed with an energy Michael hadn't felt in years. The success of the recent project had given the team a renewed sense of purpose, and Michael couldn't deny that something had shifted within him. For the first time, he began to understand the connection between leadership and humility, a balance he had never sought before. But not everyone had forgiven him so easily. "Good morning, Michael," Sarah said curtly as she passed his desk, her tone devoid of warmth. Michael winced. Sarah had been instrumental in the success of the last project, but her trust in him remained tenuous at best. He had humiliated her in meetings too many times before James's arrival. He couldn't expect her loyalty overnight. "Sarah," Michael called out, standing from his desk. She paused, turning slowly. "Yes. I wanted to say thank you for your work on the project. Your ideas about targeting the younger demographic were spot on." Her eyebrows rose, caught off guard by the unexpected praise. "Thanks," she said cautiously. "But are you okay, Michael? Compliments aren't really your thing." He chuckled awkwardly, scratching the back of his neck. "Maybe they should be." Sarah gave him a measured look before walking away. Later that day, James called Michael into his office. The room was simple, a stark contrast to the lavish decor Michael had once insisted on for his own workspace. "You wanted to see me?" Michael asked, stepping inside. James gestured for him to sit. "Yes, I've been watching your progress, and I can see you're trying." "That's good, but there's still work to be done." Michael nodded, bracing himself. "Leadership isn't just about managing tasks. It's about repairing relationships," James said. "You've alienated a lot of people, Michael. They need to see that your change is real, not just performative." Michael sighed. "I know I've made mistakes, James, but how do I fix them?" I can't erase the past. No, but you can own it, James replied. Start with honesty. Talk to the people you've hurt. Listen to them. And remember, it's not about defending yourself. It's about showing them you're willing to grow. The idea unsettled Michael. He was used to controlling conversations, steering them to his advantage. Vulnerability was foreign territory. That afternoon, he approached Sarah at the break room coffee station. Got a minute? He asked. She glanced at him warily. Sure. Michael took a deep breath. Look, I know I haven't been the easiest person to work with. I've been dismissive, harsh, and, well, arrogant. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Sarah blinked, clearly surprised. You're apologizing? I am, Michael said, his voice steady. And I know words aren't enough. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance to earn it. Sarah studied him for a moment before nodding slowly. Okay, Michael, I'll give you that chance. But actions speak louder than words. He smiled faintly. I've been hearing that a lot lately. Word of Michael's apology spread quickly through the office. Reactions were mixed. Some employees were cautiously optimistic, while others remained skeptical. Do you think he's serious? One junior employee asked during lunch. Who knows? Another replied. But at least he's trying. That's more than I expected. Meanwhile, James observed everything quietly, his sharp gaze taking in the subtle shifts in the office dynamics. The real test came when the company faced a sudden crisis. A critical software update had failed during deployment, threatening a major client relationship. The office was in chaos, and all eyes turned to Michael for guidance. Let's gather the team, Michael said, his voice calm and steady. We'll fix this together. In the past, Michael would have handled the situation by barking orders and assigning blame. But this time he listened. He encouraged collaboration, fostering an environment where ideas flowed freely. It was Sarah who proposed the solution, and instead of claiming credit, Michael made sure everyone knew it was her idea. Great work, Sarah, he said during the debriefing meeting. Your quick thinking saved the day. Sarah smiled, the tension between them easing just a little. At the end of the day, James called Michael into his office once more. I heard about the crisis, James said, leaning back in his chair. You handled it well? Michael allowed himself a small smile. It wasn't just me. The team stepped up. That's exactly the point, James said. You let them shine. That's leadership, Michael. Michael's expression grew serious. James, can I ask you something? Of course. Why are you giving me this chance? After everything I've done, you could have let me go. Why didn't you? James studied him for a moment before replying. Because I've been where you are. I've made mistakes, some of them worse than yours. But someone believed in me when I didn't deserve it. That changed my life, and I wanted to pay it forward. Michael nodded, the weight of James's words sinking in. As the weeks went by, the company continued to thrive under James's leadership. The culture had shifted significantly, becoming more inclusive and collaborative. And while Michael's journey was far from over, he was beginning to see the rewards of his efforts. Employees who once avoided him now sought his advice. He was no longer feared, but respected, a change he hadn't realized he craved until now. One evening, as he packed up for the day, Sarah stopped by his office. Heading out? She asked. Yeah, Michael replied. Long day. She hesitated before speaking. I just wanted to say, you've been doing a good job lately. People are noticing. Michael smiled, genuinely this time. Thanks, Sarah. That means a lot. She nodded and left, leaving Michael to reflect on how far he had come and how much further he wanted to go. Months had passed since the fateful day James Carter was revealed as the new owner of the company. The transformation in the workplace was palpable. Employees who once worked in silence, afraid of stepping out of line, now collaborated openly. The air of tension and fear that had loomed over the office had been replaced with one of mutual respect and shared purpose. And Michael Thompson had become a central part of this change. On a chilly morning, the office was abuzz with preparation for the company's annual conference. This year's theme was Leading with Integrity, and the keynote speaker was none other than James Carter himself. Michael sat in his office, adjusting his tie in the reflection of his computer screen. A knock on the door broke his concentration. Come in, he called. It was Sarah, holding a folder and a coffee cup. Thought you might need this, she said, placing the cup on his desk. Thanks, Sarah, Michael said with a smile. She lingered for a moment, then said, It's strange, you know. A year ago, I wouldn't have imagined you as the guy everyone looks up to now. You've really turned things around, Michael. He leaned back in his chair, her words sinking in. I had a lot to learn, he admitted, and a lot to make up for. Well, whatever you're doing, it's working, Sarah said with a smile before leaving. The conference hall was packed, employees seated at round tables decorated with sleek centerpieces. The room buzzed with anticipation as James took the stage, his presence commanding yet approachable. Good morning, everyone, James began, his voice steady. Today, I want to talk about the journey this company has been on and the lessons we've all learned along the way. He shared anecdotes about his time working undercover, highlighting the strengths he had observed in the team while also addressing the areas that needed improvement. We've come a long way, he said, his gaze sweeping the room. But none of this would have been possible without the willingness to embrace change. And today, I want to celebrate someone who embodies that transformation. The room grew silent, and Michael's chest tightened. Michael Thompson, James said, gesturing toward him. Please join me on stage. A murmur rippled through the crowd as Michael stood, his heart pounding. He walked to the stage, feeling every pair of eyes on him. When he reached James, the two men shook hands, and James turned to address the audience. Michael's journey is a testament to the power of self-awareness and growth. He took a hard look at himself, acknowledged his mistakes, and chose to become better, not just for himself, but for everyone around him. That's the kind of leadership we need. The room erupted in applause. Michael's face flushed, but this time it wasn't from shame. It was from pride. Not the hollow pride he had once chased, but the genuine pride of knowing he had earned the respect of those around him. After the conference, Michael found himself standing near the edge of the stage, watching as employees mingled and celebrated the success of the event. James approached him, holding 2 glasses of champagne. One for you, he said, handing Michael a glass. Michael took it, his smile genuine. Thanks for everything. James raised his glass in a toast. To growth and second chances. Michael clinked his glass against James's. To growth, he echoed. In the weeks that followed, Michael continued to lead with a newfound sense of purpose. He took every opportunity to mentor younger employees, sharing not just his successes, but also his failures. He openly admitted the mistakes he had made in the past, using them as lessons for others. The company thrived under James's leadership, breaking records for innovation and employee satisfaction. But the greatest success wasn't in the numbers. It was in the culture. One afternoon, as Michael wrapped up a meeting, a junior employee approached him. Mr. Thompson, she said hesitantly. Call me Michael, he said with a smile. She nodded. I just wanted to say, I've learned a lot from you. You're the reason I feel like I belong here. Michael's chest tightened with emotion. Thank you, he said softly. As she walked away, Michael turned to the window, gazing out at the city skyline. For the first time in his career, he felt at peace, not because of his title or his achievements, but because he had finally become the leader he had always aspired to be. In a quiet moment in his office, Michael found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. He picked up a framed photograph on his desk, a candid shot of the entire team laughing during a recent company retreat. At the center of the photo was James, his arm draped around Michael's shoulder. Michael smiled, setting the photo back on his desk. The past was still there, a shadow that lingered, but it no longer defined him. Because now, he was defined by something far more meaningful, the trust and respect of those he led, and the knowledge that he had earned it.